The wagons, Matkov's teachers and the first-year border guards with political officer Skira were sent away before daylight. With me remained 30 to 35 of the most hardy and trained fighters. So we followed those units of the detachment that were leaving through Monastiriska to Gizatin and Proscurov. Late in the evening we caught up with some artillery unit on the road. Tractors and tractors went without lights, carrying guns of different caliber on trailers. The column stretched along the road for more than a kilometre. Many of the guns had no crews, only a tractor driver or a tractor driver. Standing on the side of the road, the commander was hustling his men, trying to speed up the movement and force the column to follow the shortened distances. When we were close to the commander, he called me over. "Listen, Lieutenant, your men are tired, aren't they?" "Tired, Comrade Kombrig. We're on foot from the border." "Then put them 2 or 3 men on the guns, and we'll move together." We were quite satisfied with such a proposal. The border guards were placed on the guns, and we travelled about 40 kilometres during the night. And in the morning we said goodbye to our companions and continued moving to the east by a parallel country road. In the evening we found ourselves somewhere between Gizatin and Proscurov, in a settlement located in a deep and round, like a bowl, gully. There we met the local district military commander, a major, who was at the same time the head of the garrison. "Go to the western outskirts of the city and take the defence there by the road," he ordered. I repeated the order I had received, but asked for help in feeding the men. "We do not have our own kitchen. The soldiers have not eaten anything for a long time." Major called a petty officer and ordered, "Take the men to the canteen." In the city canteen we were fed properly. The border guards filled their water flasks and took some food with them. Leaving the cart and the liaisons at the house where the garrison headquarters was located, I led the men to the place where we had just come from. On the outskirts of the town, on both sides of the road, someone had already dug trenches. In them the outpost, and took the defence. Looking around, I noticed a gun behind us, in the garden of the last hut. Skira and I went there. We talked to the artilleryman and found out that it was the artillery unit we had recently escorted. At about 2:00 in the morning I was tracked down by liaison officers and was given an order from the major military commander to come to the headquarters. Alone or the whole outpost? I checked with the liaisons. "The whole outpost." "Good. Go through the trenches, wake up the men. Tell the squad leaders to build the personnel immediately." Soon we were at the headquarters. In a large, spacious room sat several commanders' artillerymen, among them familiar Kombrig. "In an hour we are leaving," he said, nodding his head at us. "Some of the guns and tractors will have to be blown up. We have no fuel, no shells either. We can't leave the equipment to the enemy." The commander called several commanders by name and ordered them to start retreating. Then he turned to us. "Come to the table, border guards. I also ask you to sign this act." He handed us a document that had already been drawn up. The act listed the numbers and calibers of the guns, brands of tractors, the circumstances and place of their destruction. Then came the signatures. The last one was the signature of the local district military commander. Skira and I signed our names. On the hill behind the village stood the tractors and implements prepared for destruction. Everyone went outside. Kombrig gave the signal. One after another explosions followed. The hillock was covered with dust and smoke. When the smoke cleared, we saw mangled guns and tractors. With the extreme shortage of equipment, it was sometimes destroyed with their own hands. There was no other way out. Meanwhile, Hitlerites were approaching Berdichov and Zhytomyr. Separate reconnaissance units of the enemy cut the roads going to Stanislav, Vinitsa, and Proscurov. Here and there, outposts and commandants' offices of our detachment were engaged in fierce battles with the enemy. A particularly serious clash took place near Monastiriska, between the Dniester and Zolotaya Lipa rivers. Here, at the crossroads, was one of the bridges across the Dniester, which the Nazis were in a hurry to seize. The 5th Commandant's office, which was covering the marching column of the detachment, fought with the enemy on absolutely open ground. The enemy far surpassed the border guards in manpower and equipment. He had armoured personnel carriers and tanks. The outposts fought only with small arms and grenades, but inflicted serious damage to the enemy. To seize the bridge, Hitlerites needed considerable time. I remember well the beginning of this battle. Moving following the detachment, the outpost by evening appeared at a small settlement. Some army hospital was sheltering here from bombing. With the head of the hospital, major of medical service, there were 13-15 people of service personnel. We spent the night in the village, and in the morning the major offered to go together. Even before sunrise, our column passed several large and small villages and went down to the Dniester. Along a wide valley the road ran down to a wooden bridge, darkened from time, but still strong. Here we saw heaps of rubble. Behind them, border guards with machine guns were lying in shallow trenches. I saw Lieutenant Alexei Frolov, with whom I had once served at the same commandant's office. Frolov looked at the passing cars with inflamed eyes. He was not wearing a cap, his grey whiskers stood out on his uncovered head. Noticing me, he shouted something. But because of the noise of the engines, it was difficult to make out his words. The border guards offered desperate resistance, several times rushed into a counterattack, but, not having anti-tank means, were forced to retreat, said in one of the documents. -5 Border Commandant's Office, under the command of Captain Terentiev GSS. Cut off. There are no exact data about it. The former Chief of Staff of the 5th Commandant's Office, retired Colonel Mikhail Petrovich Artyokhin, who died in 1971, recalled this battle. As soon as the detachment left Galich, the enemy kept trying to press us to the river. At the bridge over Dniester, near its tributary Zolotaya Lipa, Hitlerites managed to bypass our flanks. Commandant's office took the battle. Commandant Captain Terentiev gathered together machine gun squads and appointed Lieutenant Alexei Alexeyevich Frolov, the chief of the 17th Outpost, to command the machine gunners. It was on Frolov's group that the main blow came. Machine gunners fought desperately and put many fascists near the riverbank. Thanks to their courage, the main forces of the commandant's office managed to break through a gap in the enemy's fighting order, break out of the ring and join the detachment. Lieutenant Frolov and the border guards who were with him were killed. Captain Terentiev did not come out of this battle either, but the 5th Commandant's Office continued to fight the enemy for many more days and weeks. Years have passed since my last meeting with Lieutenant Frolov, and now in the central archive of the border troops I as if saw him again, when I was thumbing through the yellowed pages of his personal file. From the photocard, enclosed in the file, looked at me a simple Russian face. The look of grey eyes was stern and calm. Frolov's biography was simple and straightforward. He began his border service as a private in the Slavuta border detachment. He graduated from the School of Junior Commanders. He became a foreman of the outpost, then assistant chief and chief of the outpost. He was a man who never gave up before difficulties, characterized by fearlessness. I remember how shortly before the beginning of the war, when we were at the training camp in Moscow, the head of the border troops, General Sokolov, came to us. He summarized the results of the training for the week, and then asked how we were doing, what was our mood. We were not very happy with some of the classes designed for inexperienced, novice border guards. Taking advantage of this conversation, Frolov, with his usual directness, remarked, "Comrade General, why are they playing border guards with us here? We are not first-year soldiers or cadets of the school. Some of us have already served on the border for a dozen years. How to lie on duty, how to move on patrol, we pass this science every day on the border. Let them teach us here what they can't teach us in the detachment. They will show us new military equipment, give lectures on some issues of tactics of modern combat, tell us about the methods of reconnaissance work. And at the same time, it would be nice to see Moscow, go to museums, theatres. After all, many of us have not been in the capital for many years." The head of the troops listened attentively to Frolov, thanked for the useful comments. Significant changes were made in the schedule of our classes. So remained Communist Frolov until the last minute of life. He consciously went to self-sacrifice, saving the lives of his comrades in the commandant's office. Lieutenant Frolov fought in battle to the last cartridge, as long as his heart was beating. Let his wife Anastasia Andreevna, his fellow countryman from the village of Filino, Ivanovo region, where he was born and grew up, know about it. Details of heroic fight of Captain Terentiev and soldiers of his commandant's office with German fascist invaders are also known. Border guards fought to the last and all died breaking through the ring of encirclement. It was like Commandant Terentiev. Not so often, but I had to meet Captain Terentiev when I was serving at the 5th Commandant's office. Communication with him left the kindest memories of him as a serious commander, skillful organizer of border protection, sensitive mentor of border guards. His manly, tanned, almost bronze face, slender, lean figure, as if dried by the hot winds and scorching desert sun, are forever etched in my memory. And so it was. For many years Captain Terentiev served on the Turkmen border. The civil war and the fight against the Bazmiki were on his shoulders. The communist Terentiev was utterly devoted to the people, the party and military duty. Captain Terentiev's wife Maria Leonidovna now lives in Tashkent. His daughters Gertrude and Olympiada have grown up. Olympiada visited me in the summer of 1968. I was just like that she pointed to her daughter, with whom she came together, when on the morning of June 22nd, 1941, my father came home and said that the Germans had attacked us. I looked out the window, but I saw nothing but high mountains covered with fir trees. Soon a truck arrived. Women and children were already sitting in it. My father put us in the car and said goodbye to us. In the morning we arrived in Stanislav. Red Army soldiers were coming along the roads to the front, tanks and guns were moving. Having passed the machine gun barrier of the 5th Commandant's office headed by Lieutenant Frolov, we arrived at the Zebruch River in a few hours. On a steep hill lay the town of Gizatin in the green of orchards. The walls of the church were dazzlingly white among the houses scattered everywhere. Gizatin is the old frontier. It was here, as we supposed, that the Red Army units that had withdrawn from the frontier were to repel the enemy. The city was still asleep. But on the other side of the Zebruch could see the figures of soldiers in green caps. On the big stone arch in front of the bridge was a slogan: "Socialism will erase all the boundaries of capitalism." Just beyond the bridge lay hand-held machine gunners. A few border guards, led by a lieutenant, were digging trenches in front of the outpost building. It was one of those outposts that remained on the old frontier to maintain the regime in the border zone. The hospital was leaving for Vinnytsia. It was not on our way. The border guards got off their cars. I went to the lieutenant. We introduced ourselves to each other, he said. Everybody's going to Proscurov. I guess you're going there too? I confirmed it. Then I asked him if he had spotted a political officer, 3 wagons with border guards and 2 young women. They passed by late last night. There was no one else after them. In the yard of the outpost, a cauldron was smoking on the fire. The lieutenant offered us breakfast. We did not refuse. I liked the lieutenant. He was young, slim, and dressed in a black leather jacket with straps from cavalry equipment. How long have you been commanding the outpost? I was called up at the beginning of the war. We talked about the situation at the front. Then I noticed. There, beyond the Zebruch, our troops are gone. We are the last to leave. Join us. Let's go together. No, the lieutenant shook his head. I didn't receive an order to withdraw. What's the point of staying? You have only 12 men and 1 machine gun. What can you do here? But the lieutenant shook his head again. No, I won't go. I didn't get the order. After the war, one visited Gizatin again. They said that at the beginning of July 1941, there was a hot fight near the bridge over the Zebruch. Border guards detained an enemy motorized convoy for a whole day. Then the border guards were supported by some army unit. The Germans never got through here. They had to look for a way around. Who was the lieutenant we met at the bridge over the Zebruch? Who were those who stayed with him and fulfilled their duty to the end? The Central Archive of Border Troops gave the following information. From the documents it was established that in 1941, in the town of Gizatin, there was a 22nd Frontier outpost of the 22nd Frontier Detachment and the management of the 4th Frontier Commandant's office of the same detachment. At the 22nd Frontier outpost served 17 people, including Lieutenant Chizenkov Nikolai Ivanovich, the head of the outpost, and junior political officer Baranov Sergei Antonovich, deputy head of the outpost on political part. At the outpost served Alexei Vasilievich Tankovsky, petty officer, Konstantin Mikhailovich Senatorov, squad commander, Konstantin Dmitrievich Ivanov, squad commander, Arkady Yakovlevich Nazarov, manual machine gunner, Ivan Yegorovich Brinkov, manual machine gunner, Emilian Afanasyevich Horan, cook, Anatoly Ivanovich Temerin, gunner, Alexey Ivanovich Shibaikin, gunner, Semyon Ponomarev, gunner, Sergei Grigorievich Karshin, gunner, Afanoy Pantelievich Nuzhny, gunner, Nikolai Timofeyevich Rozhkov, gunner, Grigory Afanasyevich Skritnikov, gunner, Polikarp Lukyanovich Kosinov, gunner, Mikhail Efimovich Rishenko, gunner. Two of them was killed, and who survived it is impossible to establish, as the documents of the 22nd Border Guard detachment for June 1941 and the subsequent period have not survived. There is no information about place of birth and place of residence of the Border Guards before they were called up for military service in the list. The personal file of Lieutenant N. I. Chizenkov contains data that he was born in 1913, a native of Novozensk district, Saratov region. Family. Wife Chizenkova Anna Vasilievna, born in 1916, a native of the town of Novozensk, and daughter Lyudmila, born in 1939. At first it was impossible to find out more, and suddenly, on the eve of the 25th anniversary of our victory over Nazi Germany, I received a letter. The Red Pathfinders of the Gizatinskaya 8-year school appeal to you. We were born and live in the village, where the state border of our country passed until 1939. Here were hard service of the Chekist soldiers. Many exciting stories about these courageous people are kept by old residents. Decades will pass, and the memory of glorious feats of border guards will remain in the hearts of people. We are especially concerned about the events of 1941. It is known that on July 5, 1941, a group of border guards took the first blow of fascist soldiers. Border guards fought selflessly, remained faithful to the military oath to the end. The pioneers wrote that they were searching for the border guards of Gizatinskaya frontier outpost that they found in the city of Novosensk, the sister of the head of the outpost I. Dupsova, and the sister of the head of the outpost I. Dupsova. Dupsova, and in the city of Khmelnytsky, the wife of N. I. Chizenkov Anna Vasilievna. Anna Vasilievna Chizenkova wrote to the pioneers about the life and heroic death of her husband. It turned out that Chizenkov died while saving the regimental banner in 1941, somewhere between Vinnytsia and Kiev. On the last letter of N.I. Chizenkov, dated July 26, 1941, is the address the Red Army of the Southwestern Front, PN 505, Command T, 22 Border Guard Detachment NKVD. Pioneers also asked to clarify the name of one of the soldiers of the 22nd Outpost. He is known to them as Teterin, but in the lists of soldiers is listed as Temerin. We made a repeated request to the Central Archive of Border Troops, to which they replied as follows: to your letter we inform you that in the personnel record book of the 22nd Volochi Border Troops for 1940 to 1941, there is the following: Teterin Anatoly Ivanovich, a gunner of the 22nd Border Troops. The surname Teterin is written illegibly, it can be read as Temerin. We cannot clarify the surname Teterin I. We cannot, as there are no other documents on the personnel records of the 22nd Border Troops in the archives. It seemed that there would be no new information about the border guards of the 22nd Outpost. Suddenly someone called my apartment. I opened the door. At the threshold stood a medium-sized thin man of about 50 years old. "Hello," he said. I returned the greeting. "You don't recognize me?" the man asked. "No," I answered, looking at his tanned, manly face. "Have we met somewhere?" "Yes. Do you remember July of the 41st year, the outpost in Gizatina? I am a former border guard of that outpost, Polikarp Lukyanovich Kosinov. Kosinov was just passing through Moscow. He had very little time. Of course, I didn't remember his face. Our stay at the Gizatin outpost was too short, and at that time I had to talk only with the chief, as it is now known, Lieutenant Chizenkov. But Polikarp Lukyanovich remembered me and recognized me now. He lives in the village of Novo Makarov on the Voronezh land, works as a blacksmith in the collective farm workshop, twice awarded the Medal for Labour Valour. He told the following about the outpost and himself. I was drafted into the border troops in 1937. At first I served at the frontier outpost in Gizatin. In October 1939 I was transferred to the 92nd Frontier Detachment as an instructor of a search dog at the frontier outpost in the town of Paripsy. I had a lot of detentions of violators of the state border in 1940. I expired the term of service, but in the air, as they say, smelled a storm. And together with other border guards to be demobilized, I was sent to reinforce the old border. So I found myself again in Gizatin at the 22nd Border Outpost. The war caught me here. Red Army units were withdrawing through our outpost. By the beginning of July, all of them had passed through. We were left alone on the old frontier. One night, the chief of the outpost, Lieutenant Strokoff, put me and one border guard on sentry duty at the bridge. At night, we heard someone sneaking towards us in the darkness. I called out to the unidentified men, and in response there were machine gun bursts. We also opened fire. 2 of the attackers, dressed in civilian clothes, were killed. It happened just before your outpost passed through Gizatin. We took the defence at the bridge, and when Hitlerites tried to break through the bridge, we met them with friendly fire. A traffic jam was formed, and we were beating Hitler's soldiers. They had to deploy near the river. Just at that time, some army unit came to the aid of the outpost. By joint efforts, we repulsed several times attacks of fascists. On the second day, they put a massive fire of artillery on us, called airplanes. But even this did not help. Then, having found a ford, Hitlerites began to cross the river downstream. We received an order to withdraw in the direction of Vinnitsa. In some small town near Vinnitsa, our 22nd Border Detachment was concentrated. There were only 3 of us from Gizatin Border Outpost Horon, Strokoff and me. And again there were fights. Strokoff was killed in one of them. We were surrounded. We fought our way back to our unit together with Captain Dmitry Polyakov. Then I was enlisted as a company foreman in the 97th Border Regiment. In the battle near Kharkov in 1942, I was severely concussed. That's all, finished Kosanov. Lieutenant Chizenkov and junior political officer Baronov Kosonov saw for the last time in the battle at the bridge over the Zizbruch. I didn't know then that I was parting forever with this courageous man who had joined his outpost in an unequal battle with the enemy. And even if I knew, what could I do? We didn't leave without orders either. And each day won from the enemy, even at the cost of self-sacrifice, contributed to the organization of repulse of the enemy on new frontiers. In Yarmolintsy we caught up with the border guards, who were leaving together with Skira. Here, in a garden or in a forest, the soldiers were waiting out the heat of the day. Starshina Vershainin and the cook Mikhailov cooked eggs on the fire in big cast iron. Where did they get so many eggs from? I asked Vershinin sternly, suspecting that someone had dared to beg them from the locals. Skira explained that he had authorized the opening of a nearby store, which no longer belonged to anyone. There was nothing in the store but eggs, so they took them to feed the fighters. It's not to be wasted. For some reason, it was in Yarmolintsy that I noticed how the border guards had lost weight, turned black and gaunt, how they did not look like those carefree, cheerful cavaliers in their sun-soaked, sun-scorched gymnasiums, who were twirling around in the courtyard of the outpost with Kriva and Ivashkov girls on the last evening before the war. Between the past and the present lay a line, which could not be erased by anything. Back on the road. Border guards go concentrated severe. The road runs near the former fortified areas. Not a soul. Black empty eye sockets look loopholes of reinforced concrete pillboxes. Neither guns, nor machine guns, nor those who had to keep every metre of land under fire, dressed in stone and iron. Where has everything gone? Remarked one of the soldiers who served here before 1939. So much for the old border, and they said we would not retreat further. Sergeant Smolyanets calms us down. Proscurov is also an old border. Maybe the defence is occupied there. We walked with the political officer in silence, not interfering in the sudden conversation. A year and a half ago, when we served on the old border, It seemed to us an impregnable fortress. Soldiers and commanders had been to the fortification units and had seen a lot of things with their own eyes. Now there was none of that. After the border moved to the west, the fortified areas were dismantled and mothballed in connection with their construction on the new border. Following the treacherous invasion of Hitler's troops, the old fortified areas were hastily put back into fighting condition, but unfortunately it was not possible to achieve their former strength. "Yes," I said to Skira, "the picture is not cheerful, but we need to cheer people up. Maybe there's something we don't know." Skira walked along the column. "Why are you so gloomy, Eagles?" I heard his voice. "The bunkers are empty, no problem, if the fighting spirit is strong. Let's remember how we fought at the border. Who fought us or them?" It was getting dark. Somewhere in the northeast, the sky was illuminated by flashes of broad lightning. The enemy was bombing something again, but the rumble of explosions did not reach us. We could hear only the squeak of sand under the wheels of our wagons and the muffled conversation of the political commander with the soldiers. By July 7th, the majority of the detachment units concentrated in the area of the railway station Proscurov. It was supposed to transfer the detachment from Proscurov by railroad transport through Starokonstantinov to Gizatin. However, by this time the Germans approached Berdichov. Colonel Rogatin, the chief of staff of the Ukrainian frontier district, who was in Proscurov, changed the original plan and ordered to withdraw through Zemarinka, Vinnytsia and Gizatin to the town of Skira. Those who had time to load into echelons were sent there by railroad. Others, mainly the detachment headquarters and headquarters units, were moved by motor transport. Individual outposts, for which there were not enough cars, went to the point of concentration by country roads. We approached Proscurov late in the evening after another bombardment. The railroad tracks were full of overcrowded military echelons. People were sitting on the steps, in the vestibules, on the roofs of the cars. Having stopped the border guards at the station, I, with my contacts, began to sneak through the railroad tracks. With difficulty, I found the train with the border guards. There I saw Captain Shabakov. "Well, have you arrived?" Without letting me report, asked the commandant. "Is everything all right?" "That's right," I replied, and added only that the wagon is out of order, and it's a bit heavy to carry the machine gun on yourself. Another 10 men rubbed their feet. Besides, we have 2 Matkov teachers with us. All in all, 15 people, as they say, unfit. I don't know how Gavril Ivanovich treated other chiefs of outposts, but he treated me with great trust and fatherly kindness. Although our joint service was short, Shapakov took over the commandant's office only in early 1941. I believed in him, his commanding talent, calmness and judgment. Between us there was complete mutual understanding. That's when the commandant realized that I would not complain in vain. "Let's bring those who find it difficult to go here, and hurry up, and with the rest go through Starokonstantinov to Skira." I ran across the railroad bed and quickly gathered the people who were to be sent with the echelon. Politruk Skira led them to the station. "Stay with them," I shouted to Maxim after them. We went on our way. Imperceptibly we measured 10 kilometers, perhaps more. Suddenly the column stopped. The chief in the head was transmitted through the ranks. A motorcycle with a sidecar stood across the road, and 3 men were walking near it. One of the patrolmen, obviously the senior, asked impatiently, "Where is he, your chief?" I introduced myself. "You can't go to Starokonstantinov, the Germans are there," he said. "Go to Gizatin." "And how to get there?" "Go back, get to Kamelnik and ask there." To shorten the way, we turned off the road into a pea field and took the necessary azimuth by compass. We walked like that for about an hour, until we found ourselves on some country road. It was risky to move further. A compass was a compass, but who could tell where the enemy was now? And the men were tired, literally falling asleep on the move. So I decided to wait out the night in the field. Sentries were posted, and soon everyone fell asleep. I was the only one who couldn't sleep. Lying on my back, I looked into the star-studded, almost tarry sky and thought about how far we were from the border, not of our own free will. Not even half an hour passed, when I heard the familiar rumble of German bombers. Over Proscurov hung parachutes with flares from airplanes. Anti-aircraft guns slammed, but their faint sound was drowned out by bomb bursts. Pillars of fire rose to the sky. All around was illuminated by a faint twilight. The deafening thuds were heard for quite a long time. I quietly fell asleep to the sound. When I woke up, I realized that it had long since dawned. There was an amazing silence. The border guards were lying motionless. Even the sentries had their faces pressed into the ground. An unpleasant chill pricked my heart had something happened. I started breaking Vershinin, who was lying closest to me. Mikhail mumbled something and opened his eyelids heavily. I was relieved from my heart. Fatigue had broken people. We should leave the open place as soon as possible. God forbid airplanes would come. But the horses can hardly stand on their feet. Vershinin makes straw harnesses, and cavalrymen begin to rub the muscles of our horses. The country road brought us to the bank of a quiet, sedge-covered river. Along it we reached the town of Khmelnyk, a green resort place. Some army headquarters was located here. On one of the streets we were detained, and asking how we got here, we were advised to get out as soon as possible. Except for the field guard, there were no troops in Khmelnyk. Somewhere halfway to Gizatin, walking far from the main roads, we came upon a quiet village. I decided to give the people a rest. The villagers welcomed us warmly. They fed us, gave us drink, and the women began to wash linen and shoelaces. For the first time after leaving the border, I touched my face with a razor and shaved off my beard, which had already grown quite a lot. In the evening, the chairman of the collective farm, a sturdy man of 50, ordered to slaughter a ram. Tables were set up right under the trees. We were treated to meat, fried potatoes, kvass, milk and ryazhenka. Old men, women and children sat at the table with us. Everyone was interested in how things were at the front, where the Germans were. We answered that we were coming from the border. We did not know what was going on in the world. Yesterday Germans were in Starokonstantinov and Berdichev. In Khmelnyk we were still ours. And how will they let the German go further? Asked a very ancient old man. And how many of ours are there against him? Answered the chairman of the collective farm. He said that we beat the Germans back in 1918, and if they come here, we will go partisan, as we did then, in the revolution. Late in the evening we left our shelter, and all night we walked along the field, the road, the ravines, until at last we saw the outline of the town. All along its outskirts stretched trenches. There were also mounted guns. In some places we could see tanks buried in the ground up to their turrets. Gizatin was in front of us. Patrolmen stopped us and, having checked our documents, told us how to get to Skira. On the morning of July 11th, the outpost arrived in Skira. The small town was literally drowned in gardens. By a huge pond we found our commandant's office. A group of fighters together with Skira, who had travelled from Proscurov by echelon, was already here. There were also our orderlies, Matkov teachers. Maxim reported to me that Captain Gladkik had ordered to send the girls to Kiev with passing cars. But there was a difficulty during the bombing of the train in Proscurov. Their documents, along with other things, were burned. Who would believe in Kiev that they were teachers? It was wartime. So I left them in the house until your arrival. All right, I said, we'll think about what to do next. Klavdia Yakovenko and Valentina Kovaleva felt that the conversation was about them and came up to us. We are not going anywhere from you, they said. We have been walking with the outpost from the very border, and now, when it became quiet, you want to send us somewhere. I told the girls that they should let me have a break from the road first, and then we'll figure out what's going on. There is nothing to sort out. We are not a step away from you, said Yakovenko cheerfully. To which I replied, You must understand, girls, that I myself to decide the question of your future fate cannot. This is a matter for the command. Soon I reported to Major Vrublevsky about the arrival of the outpost. At the same time I asked him what to do with the teachers. They are not subject to military duty. We can't leave them in the detachment, said Vrublevsky. As for the documents, it's easier. Write with Skira under what circumstances they were burned. We'll give the girls certificates. With the certificates and the money certificate, which I had written out in the financial section at my own expense for a month, I went back to Klava and Valentina. How reluctant they were to part with the border guards of the outpost, with whom they had travelled from the very border. But what was to be done? The squad cars were leaving for Kiev. The teachers were sent with them. After the war, looking for Kovaleva and Yakovenko, I received an answer from the Novopskov Police Department. We inform you that citizen Kovaleva, Valentina Sergeevna, born in 1918, does not live in the district. In 1945 VS, Kovaleva worked as a teacher at the school in the village of Berezovka for only 4 months. After that she left in an unknown direction. In the Regional Address Bureau of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Lugansk region and Novopskovsky passport office she is not registered or discharged. It took a long time to get any information about Klavdia Yakovenko, but still the girls were found many years after the war. V.S. Kovaleva lives in one of the state farms of Volyn region, and K. I. Yakovenko in the village of Prosyanaya, Dnepropetrovsk region. Now both teachers are retired and have sons. We just saw the girls off when a new order came to send to the cavalry squadron, being formed at the detachment headquarters Petty Officer Vershinin and all the cavalrymen of the outpost. The horses for formation and supply horses were also transferred to the same squadron. Similar orders were given to all outposts. The detachment command created a mobile reserve in case of any complications. The measure was reasonable, but the situation of outposts, left without means of transportation, was getting worse. Our economic managers worked the old-fashioned way. When we stood in place, they supplied us more or less tolerably well. But as soon as the outposts dispersed or began to march, all communication with the rear was cut off. Looking at Petty Officer Vershinin, who was leaving with the cavalrymen, I remembered the day when he first arrived at the outpost. It was in November 1940. A border guard with a dashing cavalry bearing came into the office. I will not hide, the first meeting with Vershinin upset me. The new petty officer wanted to emphasize that he was an independent man. A lamb's cap with a green top and 2 crossed white ribbons rested on his head. The long overcoat was edged in many places with green cloth. The multitude of buttons, polished to an incredible luster, made his eyes ripple. A hussar, indeed. As if not noticing his motley attire, I said, "If you were sent to the outpost, then until the evening to dispose of yourself, get acquainted with people, and then we'll talk about everything." At the combat formation, I introduced the new petty officer to the personnel and ordered the sergeant temporarily acting as his sergeant to hand over the outpost management to Vershinin. Vershinin reported the acceptance of all cases, and we had a heart-to-heart talk with him. It turned out that he was from the village of Vorotonets, Gorky region, was born in 1918. His mother and father stayed in the village. He is serving in the border troops for the 3rd year. "You know, comrade petty officer," I said in a tone that allowed no objections, "you are my deputy in the household and assistant for training and education of border guards. You will sometimes have to stay at the outpost for the chief and independently solve various issues. And to whom much is given, much is asked of him. Let's start our joint work with the fact that you will hide your Kubanka until you are discharged to the reserve. Put on the proper headgear, tidy up your overcoat. We'll meet again in the morning to familiarize ourselves with the border section." At first we had some misunderstandings. However, soon Mikhail Vershinin became a real businessman and my assistant. He acted exceptionally bravely in the first days of the war. And now fate wanted to separate us in the town of Skira. In 1942, already being a platoon commander, Mikhail Vershinin died a heroic death during the attack on Oboyan. In the evening, the outposts and units of the detachment were built, and we were announced that by the decision of the front command we were going to protect the rear of the 26th Army. The Commissar Avdyukin made a speech. "Although on the battlefields of many fascist invaders have found a grave, he said, the enemy is still strong. He continues to climb, throwing more and more new forces into the fight. Everywhere there are heavy and intense battles. The command entrusts us with a responsible task to restore order in the front rear. The enemy uses every opportunity to cause us damage. He sends spies, provocateurs who spread false rumors, sow panic, commit sabotage. Our task is to root out this evil. It was immediately announced that the detachment was given a 5-day vacation. This message pleased everyone. Border guards were pretty exhausted during these days. From June 22nd to July 10th, 1941, fighting large and small battles, covering the withdrawal of the 13th Rifle Corps, we passed from the Carpathians to Skira, about 700 kilometers. In Skira there were also border guards of the 93rd Detachment, guarding the state border to the north of us. Here were also concentrated units of the 6th and 16th Motorized Rifle Regiments of the NKVD troops, as well as units of the 92nd Border Guard Detachment. It was thought at that time, this was evidenced by the task assigned to us, that our position at the front was going to be strengthened. The former chief of the 93rd Border Guard Detachment, Major General retired VA. Abizov recalls after leaving the border in July 1941, the Border Guard Detachment's 92nd, 93rd, 94th came to the frontier Zitomir, Gizatin, Mikhailovsky Huta, and were united into one consolidated barrier detachment. I received a radio telegram from Colonel Rogatin from Brovary near Kiev, where the headquarters of the border troops of the Ukrainian district was located, informing me that I was appointed commander of this detachment. My headquarters was stationed in Skira. As the combined detachment was concentrated, it was moved forward to protect the rear of the 5th Army, the 92nd Border Guard Detachment, and the 16th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the NKVD, and to protect the rear of the 26th Army. The 94th Border Guard Detachment and the 6th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the NKVD. Thus, the above-mentioned units were deployed in the Gizatin-Fastov section to carry out barrier service. The 93rd Border Detachment, which I continued to command at the same time, remained in Skira and was the reserve of the commander of the combined detachment, on the edge of the tank wedge. In a sand quarry near the village of Popelnia in Zhytomyr region, a normal working day was going on. The excavator was loading sand bucket by bucket and loading the approaching cars with it. Suddenly the top layer of earth from the edge of the quarry crept up. An old trench was exposed. A rusty grenade fell at the feet of the workers. Mechanic Fedorenko stopped the excavator. Grigory Ivanovich Panchok, the chairman of the village council, a former frontline soldier and a reserve captain, immediately informed the Popelnyansky district military enlistment office. The military commissar Lieutenant Colonel Vladimir Alexeyevich Golitovsky, together with the head of the 4th Department Lieutenant Colonel Pavel Ivanovich Pally, hurriedly went to the place of work. Excavations began. The remains of 8 dead soldiers, 3 grenades, 2 rifles, 3 cartridges, 3 gas masks, articles of clothing and footwear, a cloak tent, 2 plates with belts of officers' equipment, a Red Army star, a green buttonhole with 2 cubes were extracted to the surface of the ground. Conversations of the command staff not once heard the words, "Oh, how great artilleryman Strokoff covered the enemy column." Senior Lieutenant I. V. Strokoff, after the battle at Popelny, continued to fight the enemy with his artillerymen. His fame, according to veterans, rattled all over the front. His exploits were reported on Kiev radio, written in frontline newspapers. But on the 101st day of the war, IV. Strokoff died. The former commander of the firing platoon, Lieutenant V.V. Kovin, reported to Ivan Vasilievich's wife, "With your husband, as you know." I began to fight from the first days and was with him all the time until the last minute of his life. Ivan Vasilievich died in the night from September 30th to October 1st, 1941 in the village of Devichki, Peryaslav district. This village is not far from the Olshishev shooting range, where we used to go to shoot, just 5 kilometers from the Dnieper. He died the death of the brave. When I was told about it, I ran to him, took him in my arms, but he was already dead. The battle was heating up. I ordered his burial, and I ran to the guns again. The names of other heroes artillerymen who fought near Popelnya, named former gunner F.M. Sinev. The commander of the 1st firing platoon was Lieutenant V. Kovin, the 2nd Lieutenant B. Lebensky. His son, Vladimir, came to me and was interested in the circumstances under which his father died. I told him everything I knew. Until July 14th his father was alive. I remember him well. He came to our battery about 3 months before the war started. A young, fit, vivacious, sociable lieutenant, an active participant in all sports competitions. Together with him I played soccer. Among my colleagues in the battery I remember well Petty Officer K.A., Matveev, Platoon Commander A.I., Ivanushkin, Driver Alexei Loganov, Artilleryman V.D., Muzyenko, N.V., Nerezik, S.T., Nedjuev, Anatoly Chistyakov, Alexander Nikitin, Nikolai Fedyakov, Sergei Davidov. Who of them survived I do not know, as during the battle I was severely wounded and evacuated to the rear. After Capt. S. Yudin, the command of the 6th Motorized Rifle Regiment was taken by Senior Lieutenant G.G. Pantyukov, but I learned about it almost 40 years after the war, as well as about the fact that the soldiers of the regiment, having withdrawn with battles to Voronezh, then participated in the Battle of Stalingrad and ended the war in Berlin, among the first to break into its suburbs. I did not have a chance to see the end of the battle. In one of the fire raids I was concussed. I regained consciousness somewhere on the railroad tracks. I was lying on a stretcher, and in front of me there was a freight car with wounded border guards. Captain Gladkick was standing at its door, putting his bandaged hands on the bar. A little farther away I could see an ambulance. Near it Alexander Yerdakov, the liaison officer of our outpost, was walking with his rifle slung behind his back. I tried to get up. Yerdakov noticed it and ran up to me. With his help I made a few steps to the wagon. Captain Gladkick touched my hands. It was a momentary flash of consciousness, during which I could not make out what was going on around me. The ground went under my feet, and Yerdakov put me on the stretcher again. I woke up in the ambulance. Yerdakov was sitting next to me. We drove up to the station. Feldsher Boyko and Yerdakov helped me to get down to the ground. Suddenly from behind the station building appeared a highly excited political officer Skira with border guards of the outpost. Maxim came up to me and started to say something, but I couldn't make out anything. I shouted, "Why is he here?" But I couldn't hear my voice. He pointed to the battalion commissar Avdyukin, who also appeared at the station surrounded by border guards. Only then I realized that we were withdrawing. "Quickly take the men away," I waved my hand. Captain Zherba, head of the artillery service of the detachment, picked us up with Yerdakov. On the car with ammunition we caught up with our own. The Germans continued to advance along the railroad to Fastov. One of the tank columns rushed to the village of Paripsy. Shortly before that 60 border guards arrived in Paripsy together with the Chief of Staff of the 5th Commandant's office, Mikhail Artyukin. Captain Sereda left this group at his disposal, and his deputy on political part, Senior Political Officer Pavel Kolesnichenko, ordered to lead the departure of the 1st Commandant's office on the road to Strokoff. About how the events developed in Paripsy, recalled MP. Artyukin, we learned that the Germans had completely seized the station and the village Popelnya. By this time, Senior Political Officer Kolesnichenko, together with the 1st Commandant's office, was already 5 or 6 kilometers away from the village. Worried about the fate of the inhabitants, Captain Sereda decided not to take up the defense in Paripsy, but to give battle to the Germans on the other line. We left the village, but we did not pass 2 kilometers, as German tanks appeared. We realized that our comrades in the squad were ahead of us, so it was necessary to delay the enemy at any cost. Having received an order from Captain Sereda, I turned the border guards in a chain. We lay low. On both sides of the road were collective farm fields. On the left grew rye, on the right millet. Border guards courageously entered the battle with the enemy motorized column. Captain Sereda ordered to collect hand grenades and tie them to fight with tanks. The soldiers tore their shirts and tied grenades with scraps. The distance separating us from the fascist tanks and armoured personnel carriers was rapidly shrinking. We opened fire from machine guns and rifles, and Political Officer Kuzmin, border guards Vasiliev, Basov and Ivanov crawled towards the tanks. Bundles of grenades flew. The tanks stopped. Then a few more fighters crawled to the armoured cars. In order not to let them close, the fascists hit the border guards from the place. Our machine gun answered with fire, not allowing the German machine gunners on the armoured vehicles to raise their heads. But here the machine gun, behind which was Sergeant Mikhail Dunichev, fell silent. Captain Sereda himself lay down behind the machine gun. The commandant sent cue after cue at the enemy. He was firing until the surrounding German tanks did not release 2 jets of tank flamethrower. The ground burst into flames, the grass caught fire. There were only a few of us left. There was nothing to hold back the tank avalanche. We crawled away into the rye. It sheltered us until evening. When I was invited to Popelnia for the opening of the monument to the border guards of our unit, I was told that after the battle with Nazi tanks, the collective farmers of the village of Gizatin, cleaning millet, found a dead commander border guard in the field and buried him. This message interested me, and I asked my friend Ivan Ketchaluba to come with me to Gizatin. We were lucky. We quickly found an eyewitness to those events, Konstantin Ilyich Pontelelachuk. Here's what he remembered. It must have been about 3 weeks since the battle. The front line from our village was already far away. We decided to remove millet from the field, on which on July 14th, 1941 border guards fought with Hitlerites. Most of the crops were destroyed by the caterpillars of tanks, but still something survived. About 600 meters from the road I was mowing, and suddenly saw a dead man. He had a green cap on his head, and 2 sleepers on the buttonholes of his uniform. That means he was a major. K. I, Pontelelachuk, did not remember the major's surname. The dead man was buried near the road, near the mass grave, in which the fallen border guards had been laid earlier. Among the commanders of the units that fought here, there was no one with the rank of major. I left Popelny with the question, who is this major? One day, looking through the documentary fund of the Museum of Border Troops, I read a record about the battle of the 3rd and 4th Border Guards under the command of Major Bystretsov. There was no Major Bystretsov in the headquarters of the 3rd and 4th Border Commandant's offices, so it was apparently a representative of the headquarters of our or the composite detachment, which I might not have known about for some reason. To check this assumption, I wrote to Andrianov, the former commandant of the 4th Border Commandant's office in Leningrad. Andrei Leontievich replied. Now about Major Bystretsov. I don't remember his name and patronymic. I know that he appeared in the location of our defence near Popelnaya either before the battle or in the course of the battle. I appealed to him as a representative of the command for permission to withdraw from this defensive line. He died at Popelnia because I was given his overcoat with the insignia of Major 2 Sleepers. The Chief of Staff of our detachment F.I. Wroblewski specified that on the eve of the war, from the detachment left the Chief of the 1st Department, Major Lertzman. Instead of him, another comrade was appointed to this position by order of the district. But he did not have time to come to us. The war began. Perhaps he appeared somewhere later. And now among the archival files I managed to find the order to appoint Major Bystrov Sergei Vasilievich Bystrov to the position of the head of the 1st Department of the headquarters of the 94th Border Detachment. Comparing the stories of the participants of the events of those days with the text of the order, one should come to the conclusion that Major Bystretsov and Major Bystrov are the same person. It was he who arrived from Kiev to Skira on the eve of the battle in Popelna, and was the representative of the headquarters of the combined barrier unit at Colonel Abizov. Only the participants of those events inaccurately remembered his surname because of a short communication with him. On behalf of the commander of the composite detachment, Major Bystrov ordered Captain Sereda to cover the withdrawal of the main forces. From the village of Paripsy to the control of the composite detachment in Skira, Major Bystrov, apparently, went on foot, as there were no means of transportation at our disposal, and on the way he was overtaken by border guards of the 1st Commandant's office, headed by senior political officer Kolesnichenko and Chief of Staff of the Commandant's office Sipkin. They passed about 8 kilometers when they were overtaken by German tanks. Border guards took the battle on a small hill. Throwing bundles of grenades under tanks, fire from rifles and machine guns, we restrained the enemy, recalled about this battle the chief of the 2nd outpost, Dmitry Berdyugov. The fight became fiercer and fiercer. The enemy was building up forces, and the border guards were running out of grenades and ammunition. Then Major Bystro ordered to leave the cover, and the rest to withdraw to the forest, which was about 3 kilometers to the right, on the bank of the river. But few managed to do so. Bystrov himself could not withdraw. The enemy broke through our defences. We suffered heavy losses, Berdyugov told. The political officer Yakov Nestorovich Daimer, political officer Tyorin, Lieutenant Sinokop, Deputy Commandant Senior Political Officer Kolesnichenko, and many other, our fighting friends died. During the withdrawal to the forest were wounded Chief of Staff of the Commandant's Office Sipkin and Political Officer Timoshenko. Yes, the majority of border guards died a heroic death in that unequal battle, and still they forced the enemy to trample on a place and gave an opportunity to the main forces of the detachment to go to a new defensive line. The group, led by Major Vrublevsky, reached the northern outskirts of the village of Strokoff. There the border guards met an artillery regiment that was withdrawing to Bila Tserkva. Having informed the commander about the task the detachment was carrying out, Vrublevsky asked for help. The regiment commander agreed and immediately deployed a battery of 76mm guns. The cannons opened fire on the enemy tanks. This made it possible to delay the enemy advance for some time. Having met fire resistance at the boundary of the Rostovitsa River, the Germans suspended the offensive and called a reconnaissance plane to clarify the situation. With his help, they managed to establish the firing positions of the battery. A concentrated artillery and mortar fire fell on the battery. One by one the guns fell silent. The fascists occupied Strokoff. However, it rained heavily, and Hitlerites refused from further attack. Unexpected rain and darkness allowed the border guards of the detachment to move to Belaya Tserkva, where the headquarters of the 6th Rifle Corps of the 26th Army was located. We, together with the battalion Commissar Avdyukin, were also going there. The story about this day can be finished with an excerpt from the documents. One of them says the losses of the detachment in the battle near Popelnaya over 100 men killed and wounded. The enemy's losses are not less than 200 men. It is thought, however, that the Germans paid that day a more expensive price. Nobody counted how much Hitler's equipment was taken out of service, how many fascists were laid from Krogliak Height to Strokoff village. We were not up to counting. We had a different task before us. And because we fulfilled it there in Svyatoshin and Golosivka, Kiev citizens got one more day to erect defensive lines, build barricades, form armoured trains, and the command of the 26th Army to pull up its reserves. Only those who have been in this scorcher know what it was like. No, we did not defeat the enemy's tank division. We only delayed the movement of the enemy group for one day. But from such days one from the enemy was formed that first made Hitler's war machine to stomp, and then to stall on the place. On July 14th, 1941 border guards, who came from the Carpathian Mountains, closed the way of fascist tanks to the capital of Ukraine with their chests, forcing Kleist's 9th Panzer Division to stop. With the same selflessness and fearlessness fought on July 14th, 1941, and border guards of the 92nd and 93rd Border Guard detachments, who also stood in the way of tanks of General Kleist from the 48th Motorized Corps. The head of the combined detachment, Colonel Abizov, ordered the commanders of the 92nd Border Guard troops and the 16th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the NKVD to occupy the line Kazatin-Ruzhin-Komsomolskoye by the end of July 13th, and to organize the service to protect the rear of the 5th Army. However, on the morning of July 13th, the enemy suddenly turned his tank and motorized divisions to the southeast from the area of Zhytomyr to Kazatin and tried to bypass it to the east. The 16th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the NKVD internal troops west of the village of Kotlyarka was attacked by enemy tanks and was subjected to heavy bombardment from the air. The soldiers of the regiment fought the enemy fearlessly and even attacked, but suffered heavy losses and were forced to withdraw with their commander Captain Babich to Fastov. To support the regiment, Colonel Abizov sent the 1st Border Commandantry of the 93rd Detachment under the command of Captain Zinovy Osipovich Blumin to Pobushch, the 2nd to Yeshresh, and the 5th to Ruzhin. These commandantries engaged in combat with the enemy. Then they were reassigned to the head of the 92nd Peremyshal Border Detachment, Lieutenant Colonel Tarutin, and continued to fight together with this detachment. The 3rd and 4th Commandant's offices of the 93rd Frontier Detachment covered the crossings of the Rostovitsa River in Strokoff and Povalok, and then they were transferred to Fursy, where they stopped the enemy's advance. Later, the 93rd Frontier Detachment was the reserve of the commander of the 6th Rifle Corps and provided the junction between the 159th Regiment and the 41st Rifle Division, defending Bila Tserkva. The 92nd Frontier Detachment took up the defence at Zhashkov Station. On July 19th, we received information that an enemy airborne landing force had landed somewhere nearby. The detachment command received an order to destroy it. The head of the detachment, Lieutenant Colonel Tarutin, was for this purpose sent to the proposed landing area of the group of border guards under the command of Captain Barinin. Near the village of Konla, it met not the landing force, but the advanced units of the 48th Mechanized Corps of the enemy, engaged in battle, destroyed 4 tanks. But the main battle took place a little later near the village of Roji. The enemy attacked the positions of the 92nd Detachment with a large mass of tanks. In a brutal, unequal battle, border guards fought to the last drop of blood. Lieutenant Colonel Tarutin, the commissar of the detachment Yutkin, fought in the fighting order of troops and died heroically. But even after the death of the command, the detachment continued to fight under the leadership of Major Agachik and senior political officer Lubchikov, causing damage to the enemy. Together with units of the 3rd Airborne Brigade, Kiev Artillery School, the 4th Motorized Rifle Regiment of the NKVD internal troops, fought on the front line of the Kiev fortified area and the 20th Slavuta Red Banner Frontier Detachment, where I began my service. Here is what the former political officer Semyon Stepanovich Panteleev recalls about those days. Our 20th Red Banner Frontier Detachment was stationed on the zone, as the old state border was called after 1939. After heavy fighting on the border and the defence of Zhytomyr, by order of the command, the detachment occupied a new frontier 14 kilometers from Kiev on the bank of the Irpin River. Border guards of Alevsky and Yampol border guard detachments defended together with us. I remember that the defensive structures in this area have been preserved since the times of the famous maneuvers of the Kiev Special Military District. The commander of our detachment was Major Lyubchenko, later recalled to the headquarters of the partisan movement. The commissar was senior political officer Ivanov, who died in one of the battles. As far as I know, the enemy failed to break through the defence, neither at the section of our commandant's office, nor at the section of the border guard detachment. Border guards held firm. They repeatedly went into counterattacks, inflicting tangible losses on the enemy. I remember well the military commander of our commandant's office, political officer Pyotr Dudin. He was one of the heroes of border guards from the Far East, participated in the battles near Lake Hassan, for which he was awarded the Order of Lenin, was a deputy of the Supreme Soviet of the RSFSR. Possessing great endurance and courage, he appeared at the hottest sites, cheering up the fighters, inspiring them with his personal fearlessness. Unfortunately, I do not know anything about his further fate. They say he led a group to carry the banner out of the encirclement, but I never heard of him again. Convinced of the futility of their plans, and having suffered significant losses in manpower and equipment, the enemy rolled back. A more calm period of defence began. Between us and the Germans formed a neutral zone. And now, by order of the higher command in the border guard, detachment formed a reconnaissance group to capture Tungs. This group consisted of 50 to 60 volunteer border guards. Its commander was Senior Lieutenant Kizelev. I was appointed political commander. Our group existed about 2 weeks and acted in the area of Irpin and Vorzel. In Vorzel, in the premises of the Children's Sanatorium, was our base. We acted by raids on the Germans, who were mainly engaged in robbing the local population. Our actions were covered by an armoured train. Operations were carried out successfully. On one of these operations wrote an article in the newspaper Izvestia its correspondent V. Poltoratsky. In the Oral Regional Library, I found that issue of the newspaper, dated July 31st, 1941. The article was called In Search of Language. V. Poltoratsky wrote it from my words. The results of this operation: 11 killed Germans, captured 2 language weapons property. Lieutenant Olbagov, Deputy Political Officer Shishkin, and border guards Safin and Zuzgin were especially distinguished then. I remember Junior Lieutenant Shapar was in our group. Military Field Officer Borakov acted well. The last day of the defensive battles was memorable. Again on our share fell a difficult task to cover the withdrawal. At dawn we entered Kiev. I can't forget how the inhabitants of Kiev, who before believed that Kiev would not be surrendered, when they saw that the border guards were leaving, began to join us, and with knots, or even without everything, started to follow us to the Dnieper. This made our situation much more difficult, but we could do nothing. Behind the Dnieper came the most difficult period fighting in encirclement. But even in these incredibly difficult conditions, border guards showed fortitude, courage, remained faithful to military duty. We had to fulfill various tasks to cover the withdrawal, to eliminate ambushes of the enemy, to provide crossings, to do many other things. The settlements of Bereshevka, Borispil, Pyratin, Yagotin, where there were especially hot battles, were remembered for the whole life. No matter how hard it was, but I never heard of a single case when any of the border guards thought of surrendering, although the Germans literally flooded us with leaflets calling to surrender. More than 40 years have passed since then, but people have kept in their memory the feat of the border guards. Residents of Kiev and Bila Tserkva, Fastov and Gizatin, big and small towns of Ukraine, villages and hamlets remember about it. On the eve of the 20th anniversary of the victory over German fascism, the residents of Popelnyansky district in memory of the heroism of the soldiers of our 94th Border Guard Unit, who in a difficult time for our homeland courageously and steadfastly defended their land, erected near the village of Golubiatin, at the fork of the road, an obelisk on which they wrote "Comrade." Bow low to these fields. They are sprinkled with the blood of heroes. Here on July 14th, 1941, in an unequal battle with fascist tanks, died the death of the brave hero of the Soviet Union, Captain Sereda, political officer Kolesnichenko, and 152 soldiers of the 94th Frontier Detachment.